todos. I'm very happy to welcome all of you to this event today, which is being organized by the Center for Comparative Literature, Visva-Bharati, in collaboration with Coherent Digital to commemorate 100 years of Rabindranath's visit to Argentina. In the lecture that we organized in November 2024, we discussed some aspects of this visit. Today's lecture, however, is going to be somewhat different, as the focus will not be on the physical contact between the poet and any particular Latin American country, but rather on the literary contact. We are very happy to have with us Professor Roberto Morales Harley from the Universidad de Costa Rica, who is going to explore Rabindranath's impact on the literary scenario of Costa Rica. As discussant, we have Professor Shyama Prasad Ganguly, former professor of Jawaharlal Nehru University, and to all those who study Latin American literature in India, Professor Ganguly does not need any introduction. And to chair this session, we have Professor Gustavo Canzobre from Fundacion Hastinapura. He has been working on Indian literature, on Rabindranath for a very long time. His institute also works on this on these aspects. So, we are very happy that we are collaborating with Coherent Digital, and I think we have our colleagues from Coherent Digital here, Yumna, Rahim, and Elizabeth. They have been instrumental in this whole process to organize this whole thing. So thank you very much, Yumna and Elizabeth. With that, I think, Yumna, would you like to talk a little about Coherent Digital?
Sure. So I'll let Elizabeth do that first, and then we can switch to the housekeeping very quickly.
Sure, yes. Just welcome to everybody. I'll keep this very, very brief. We're very appreciative to be on this call and to be collaborating with the wonderful, wonderful speakers and panelists today. I'm Elizabeth Roby. I work at Coherent Digital along with my colleague, Yumna Rahim. We are an academic online publishing organization. Based in the US, but also we have people all over the world. I'm just in Boston, Massachusetts. Yumna is in Washington, DC. And I and Yumna work on Global South resources. And so we're just very, very happy for this collaboration. Yumna, did you want to go ahead and talk about any housekeeping details?
Sure. Thank you, Elizabeth. So thank you so much again for everyone joining. I just wanted to let you know that you're welcome to use the chat feature to communicate with us. I'll be keeping an eye on it as our presenters are speaking. Hopefully I can capture all of your questions and comments so that towards the end, we can gather all of those questions and hopefully get them answered. So please let us know if you have any questions or comments in the chat. There's also a Q&A feature. So if you have questions, you can post them there. And I'll do my best to monitor them. So feel free to communicate with us through that. Thank you.
So with that, I think we can move on directly to the lecture. Professor Roberto Morales Harley.
Good evening in India, good morning in Argentina and in Costa Rica. Greetings to Professor Canzobre from Hastinapura Foundation and to Professor Ganguly, formerly from JNU. Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya from Visva-Bharati, for inviting me to share my research with all of you who have kindly joined us today for this dialogue. So let me quickly share my screen. It's mostly images that I have brought for you today, but I think this could help my presentation.
You're full screen now, Professor. Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So for the purpose of clarity, I will divide my presentation into 5 sections of varying length. First one, my Tagore. Second one, Costa Rica's Tagore. Third one, Garcia Monge's Tagore. Fourth, Chenapui's Tagore. And fifth, the UCR's Tagore. UCR stands for University of Costa Rica, which is where I work. So let us begin with section 1, my Tagore. In 2011, as a master's student at the University of Costa Rica, wanting to specialize in ancient India, I took a course taught by Professor Soler Güello, entitled in Spanish Rabindranath Tagore and his oeuvre, simply with the intention of complementing my curriculum. But as it often does, fate had other plans for me. 2011 was a momentous year for the study of Tagore in Costa Rica, and naturally everywhere else, given the fact that this was the landmark of 150 years since Tagore's birth. In Costa Rica, the Faculty of Letters at the university, the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, and the Embassy of Costa Rica in India all came together to organize a seminar titled in Spanish, Rabindranath Tagore, A Bridge Between Two Worlds, India and Costa Rica. We were lucky enough to be then joined by our current panelist, Professor Ganguly, as well as by Professor Indranil Chakravarti. A third panelist could not make it that time, Professor Prabodh Vasudev Parikh, whose paper on Tagore's art I was then asked to read and simultaneously translate into Spanish, in order to have the audience profit from an already undertaken effort. From then on, everything just fell into place for me. From seeing an article of my own authorship published in a special issue of the journal Hispanic Horizon in 2011, to finding myself faced with the gargantuan responsibility of teaching the courses that Professor Arguello left upon her retirement in 2018. And since being in the right place at the right time seems to be something at which I excel, the course on Tagore was one of them. And once again, through the Embassy of Costa Rica in India, we had big plans for Tagore and Costa Rica, including a visit by a delegation from Professor Divyajyoti Mukhopadhyay and some of other members of his Indo-Hispanic Language Academy. Needless to say, for these past years, Tagore has been a great part of my life, my teaching, my research, and even my travels. For in 2023, I was finally able to visit Shantiniketan and give a lecture at Visva-Bharati. If I am being completely honest, Tagore is not someone that I found, but someone who found me. This was only possible because of the high esteem in which Tagore has always been held in my home country of Costa Rica. Which brings us to section 2. Costa Rica's Tagore. The reason for our encounter today is yet another landmark, 100 years since Tagore's visit to Argentina. Tagore went indeed to Latin America, but never to Costa Rica. And yet, he was very well known here since the early 20th century. General interest articles about him reprinted here, Spanish translations of some of his works also reprinted here, and even a couple of portraits of him included among those publications were all available for a Costa Rican society growingly interested in non-Western authors. This imagined Tagore, rather than the actual one, was all that Costa Rica had, and it was more than enough for a notoriously large impact. This sort of quote-unquote absent presence is what led me to gather these reflections under the title that I have chosen. According to Oxford Reference, quote, in post-structuralist theory, absent presence is a concept most closely associated with Derrida, for whom it refers to the mythical status of the supposed hub of any system of ideas. This derives from the point voiced by Socrates in Plato's Phaedrus, that the absence of the writer from a circulated text leaves it open to misinterpretation, in contrast to presence in face-to-face interaction. End quote. This notwithstanding, Tagore was for the most part correctly interpreted in Costa Rica. The language barrier was not enough of an obstacle for a universal message, both literary and educational, and the content of Tagore's work permeated the minds and the legacies of more than a few crucial figures in the cultural history of the small Central American nation of Costa Rica. Throughout Costa Rican modern history, names and personalities like Roberto Brenes Mesen, Joaquín García Monge, the one on your left, Omar Dengo, Emma Gamboa, Hilda Chenapuy, which is the one on your right, or Soler Güello, have been ready-witted enough to bring together the subject matters of Tagore and Costa Rica itself. Since Emma Gamboa is perhaps the least studied one, It was my original intention for today to dedicate most of my time to sharing some of the influence that Tagore had on her work as one of the founders of contemporary system of Costa Rican education. But my plans changed once I came upon the appalling realization that at our university's library, Emma Gamboa's works are not readily available. Some of them are not part of the collection, others have been relegated to less visited sections, and a few have even been lost. This led me to two logical conclusions. On one side, it would not be possible for me to research this topic in such a brief time span. On the other, it is something that needs to be carried out in the long run, not only for the sake of divulging Tagore's influence in Costa Rica, but also that of Emma Gamboa herself. For the time being, my main contribution will be to discuss Tagore's presence through Joaquín García Monge and through Hilda Chena Puy, which I will do respectively in sections 3 and 4. So, section 3, García Monge's Tagore. Joaquín García Monge was born in 1881 and passed away in 1958. He was a writer, an intellectual, an educator, and an editor. In fact, he was the editor of Repertorio Americano, a general interest journal running from 1919 to 1958, precisely the year García Monge passed away. And it was dedicated to the intellectual, cultural, journalistic, democratic, and pacifist comings and goings of the Costa Rica of the first half of the 20th century. And this is perhaps the most relevant for our current session. All this was framed as part of a larger Latin American milieu. The direct link between Tagore and García Monge is Repertorio Americano. And this link has been studied at length by my mentor, Professor Arguello. For instance, in the chapter Tagore and Latin America, Some Considerations, published in Spanish in 2011 as part of the book Rediscovering Tagore, 150th anniversary of the birth of the Indian poet, and republished in English also in 2011 as part of the aforementioned special issue of the journal Hispanic Horizon from JNU. At first, I thought that pursuing an already studied topic would be, as a popular Costa Rican saying goes, like raining over wetland. By now, I could not be happier with my choice. Studying Tagore in Repertorio Americano is both looking at how my fellow citizens looked at Tagore 100 years ago and looking at how my much admired Professor Arguello looked at how they looked at him. A specialist as she is in the matter, Professor Arguello has presented us the big picture. But to paraphrase the Buddhist parable, I think I might have seen another angle of the elephant. In a nutshell, the research question that I seek to answer is, how did Argentina mediate the Costa Rican reception of Tagore? To that end, I looked at around 200 issues of Repertorio Americano, from September 1919 to June 1925. That is, from the beginning of the journal to the dates of the first references to Tagore's visit to Argentina. I will now share with you some interesting findings. The first India-related author to be mentioned in Repertorio Americano is Rudyard Kipling, just within a month of the journal having been made available. The first mention of Tagore himself in Repertorio Americano comes after almost a year and a half of continuous publications. The date is February 15th, 1921. The title of the article is, in Spanish, Rabindranath Tagore, the most subtle Hindu poet. It is worth mentioning that the Spanish word for subtle, sutil, does not entail a sense of obscurity, but only one of perception and insightfulness. So, Tagore is first presented to Costa Ricans by a Mexican named José Albuerne as a poet who is both Hindu and subtle to the highest degree. As a writer, Tagore is associated in this article to his play The Post Office, which is to this day one of only two India-related texts officially recommended by the Costa Rican Ministry of Public Education at the primary and secondary levels. the other one being precisely Kipling's The Jungle Book. However, there is also a quote within the article that characterizes Tagore as a teacher. It goes, "The brilliant Hindu poet reflects, not only in his appearance and through his words, but also in his books, the two features of teachers: serenity, sincerity." As we will see, this Tagore, the teacher, is the one who will have the larger impact in Costa Rica. I cannot end this brief comment on Tagore's first mention within the journal without a reference to a drawing of Tagore by A. Garduno that accompanies the article. It's the one you have on your screens right now. A side portrait of a man, advanced in years, middle-length hair, long beard, the latter carrying even more gray hairs than the former, prominent nose, eyes almost shut as if meditating, and facing left, as if a wise man from the East compassionately looking at us Westerners who were very much in need of his wisdom. The first publication of one of Tagore's works within Repertorio Americano is that of the short story The Elder Sister, December 5th, 1921, in Zenobia Camprovis' Spanish translation. This story about a strong elder sister who decidedly assumes the upbringing of her little brother, despite what her husband, her neighbor, and even the local authorities have to say, must have resonated with a Costa Rican audience that was just a little over a year about to start the women's suffrage movement, 1923. The next couple of articles about Tagore in Repertorio Americano come also from Mexico. A Spanish translation of his acceptance speech for the 1913 Nobel Prize in Literature, dated March 20th, 1922, and a letter from Tagore to Argentinian author Alejandro Sux, whose patriotism Tagore admires. This one dated April 3rd, 1922. It is in this letter that the Costa Rican audience first reads that Tagore does not know any Spanish. The first publication about Tagore in Repertorio Americano that came directly from Argentina is an article about a trip that Tagore made to Germany. The date, March 5th, 1923. There, for the first time, Costa Rican audience comes across the name Shantiniketan, where Tagore had founded Visva-Bharati just about a year and a half earlier. The first publication of one of Tagore's works outside of Repertorio Americano is that of The Gardener. Announced in the journal from May 27, 1923, the collection of poems The Gardener appeared as one of the first books in García Monge's newly founded publishing house, El Convivio. It is worth noting that in the early years of El Convivio, only Tagore and Argentinian author Leopoldo Lugones had more than one book to their names having been published there. Also, one might take a minute to consider a second anonymous drawing. This one on your screens. This drawing of Tagore appeared in said issue of Repertorio Americano. With a little more play of light and shade, we now see the same advanced age man, with his characteristic beard, also facing left, but now with both eyes wide open. Less of a saint and more of a sage, one might say. After a 1924 that was more concerned with Gandhi than with Tagore, Repertorio Americano inaugurates the year 1925 with the front page of the first issue dedicated to Tagore. Doubtless, this had to do with the ongoing Latin American visit of Tagore. And as critics, we can appreciate two changes in perspective. One, the sources about Tagore that Repertorio Americano is reprinting are now Argentinian. And two, the emphasis is now not on Tagore the writer, but on Tagore the teacher. In 1925, from January to June alone, Repertorio Americano features 7 articles about Tagore. On January 5th, 1925, we have The School Teacher, an essay republished from La Nación, Argentina, in which Tagore emphasizes freedom as a key to education. On February 16, 1925, we have a letter by Peruvian politician Victor Raúl Haya de la Torre, titled in Spanish, to Rabindranath Tagore on occasion of his visit to Peru. It was republished from Bases, Argentina, and it explains that French writer Romain Rolland had invited Haya de la Torre to Switzerland to meet with Tagore before Tagore left for South America. Ironically enough, Haya de la Torre is sad not to make it on account of his health, when we all know that Tagore himself was also unable to make it to Peru on account of his own health. On February 23, 1925, we have a brief note republished from La Verdad, Argentina, titled in Spanish, A Message from Rabindranath Tagore to Argentinian Teachers. In a quote worth including, Tagore sums up his short message as follows. If you wish to show Argentinian teachers in a few words the path to follow, tell them that education is in essence love toward the child and respect for his freedom. The last part appears in all caps. Also, on the issue from February 23, 1925, we have the short story The Parrot's Education, republished from La Nación, Argentina. The School Teacher and the Parrot's Education were probably the most influential texts by Tagore on the earlier generations of Costa Rican educators. The piece is accompanied by a third instance of illustrations. These four ones that you have here. Only now, what the drawings include does not concern the author himself, but the text. The illustrations are by Rabindranath Tagore, and they depict in overt contrast the walls and shackles that isolate the poor parrot. These are the two pictures to your left. And the mountains of papers and expert instruments that the so-called teachers bring to help the parrot. The two pictures on your right. The child and his environment as a center of the learning process is crucial, for instance, to Emma Gamboa as well. And I insist, this needs to be further studied. Once again, on the issue from February 23, 1925, we have a declaration by Alfredo Palacios, Dean of the Faculty of Juridical and Social Sciences at the University of La Plata, Argentina, titled in Spanish, The University of La Plata, Republic of Argentina, recommends Tagore's educational offer. I would like to read it in full for its relevance vis-a-vis the anniversary that motivated our session today. It goes, considering A, that Rabindranath Tagore's oeuvre is not only that of a lyric poet, but is also inspired in a deep idealism, which means to the West a new concept of man and of life, and therefore entails the essence of a new law founded in human harmony and in an intimate expansion of personality instead of antagonism and coercion. B, that his action of apostolate, spreading through American and European countries the gospel of peace and spiritual fraternity of humankind over the incidental differences of race, caste, and religion, contains the yeast of unification of men and offers the perspective and the possibility of a fruitful and joyful future for humankind, substituting the somber horizon that gravitates over the world, one of perpetual fratricidal struggle, and being all this in agreement with the idealism that breathes within the soul of our American continent, and above all our Argentina. C, that his Bolpur school, the abode of peace, where the highest powers of the spirit are educated and cultivated, above all, in a free expansion of consciousness, thus re-establishing the equilibrium of personality, constitutes a high example and a wise teaching from which Our culture must draw inspiration to free men from the utilitarian subalternation to which today's education restrains him, thus deforming his character. Therefore, the Dean of the Faculty of Juridical and Social Sciences resolves to show to youths in general, and specifically to future educators, as a source of spiritual teachings, the oeuvre of Rabindranath Tagore, and to greet him on occasion of his arrival to our country, as a representative of the Hindu race who treasures the highest values of idealism, and as one of the great counselors of the human soul, whose action carries in germ, as the most excellent fruit, the future pacification of the world. End quote. Together with an editorial from Mexico that opened this issue of Repertorio Americano, and that also featured a portrait of Tagore, I am sharing this last portrait with you right now. This volume, 9, number 24 of the journal, from February 1925, featured a total of 4 articles about Tagore, 3 of which came from Argentina. This cannot be a coincidence when considering that Tagore's visit to the South American country of Argentina had just ended 1 month prior to the publication. So we have to situate ourselves 100 years ago. The Argentinian trip by Tagore ends by January, and by February, Costa Rican journals are exploding with news about Tagore, and these news are coming from Argentina. Moving on April the 6th, 1925, Repertorio Americano features a piece in which Tagore, who was no longer in Argentina, bids farewell to Italy during his journey from Milan to Venice, from where he would eventually travel back to India. And lastly, I would like to finish this third section of my talk just where I finish my still very limited review of issues from Repertorio Americano. Bear in mind that I only looked at numbers from September 1919 to June 1925, and that the journal and Tagore's presence in it went on to 1958. In this sense, I can without a doubt acknowledge that this is only the beginning of a new realm of research that, as in the past, I can only hope will take me places which I have still not envisioned. Maybe a full-length English study and translation of Tagore in Repertorio Americano? Only time will tell. But back to our talk. On June 18, 1925, Repertorio Americano includes a piece by Alberto López Machado. A little side note here, I have still not been able to pinpoint who this is. Maybe some of our panelists or our audience member knows. Alberto López Machado. This piece by López Machado was republished from El Hogar, Argentina, and it was titled in Spanish, A Pilgrimage to Snobismja, the residence of the divine Tagore. Snobismja is a play on words that turns the Spanish word for snobbishness, snobismo, into an oriental-sounding location. In the article, López Machado takes us with him to a barber shop, where he reads the news about Tagore's stay in Argentina, which has motivated a visit by the Sociedad Luz to his temporary residence in Punta Chica. Sociedad Luz was a cultural association established by the Argentinian Socialist Party, and López Machado doubted that such people would have a true understanding of Tagore. So López Machado decided to take part in said visit, if nothing else to have a good laugh about it. As a philologist by formation, I cannot help but remember the famous quote by Lukács: "The novel is the epic of a world that has been abandoned by God." Epic and novel coincide as narratives, but differ as contrasting perspectives. Broadly speaking, epic is sacred and novel profane. And what does this have to do with Tagore? Let me clarify this with 2 examples that I recently used. Palacios, the dean of the University of La Plata, whose extensive quote I recently read, sees Tagore's oeuvre as epic, whereas López Machado, the fellow at the barber shop who somewhat parodically mocks the fanfare around Tagore's visit to what he calls snobismja, sees Tagore's oeuvre as novel. Is this outrageous, sacrilegious perhaps? In my opinion, it is just human nature. Humans like the sacred and the profane alike. And so did Tagore for that matter, or are we going to forget about the satirical vein in the parrot's education? But beyond these theoretical elucubrations, what I would like to point out is that this piece by López Machado offers in mid-1925 the first allusion for the Costa Rican audience to Victoria Ocampo. Her name does not appear explicitly in the article, but we read in Spanish. I did not want on my part to live without finding out who the beautiful owner, in Spanish dueña, who the beautiful owner of the Packard and of Tagore actually was. The four of us then campaigned, and after half an hour we were able to find out that she was an Argentinian exegete, author of a study De Francesca Beatrice. I believe that some of these findings that I am sharing with you today are brand new. If Tagore always surprises us with new discoveries, the same can be said about the sub-area of study of Tagore and Argentina. And Costa Rica might have things to add as well. For example, Garcia Monjes Tagore might have had an Argentinian flavor to it that still had not been discussed. Now, let us quickly turn to section 4, Chenapuis Tagore. Hilda Chenapuy was born on January 23, 1923. So, not only within the time lapse of the issues from Repertorio Americano that I examined, but also in the same month and nearly the same day that gathers us for our discussion today. Chenapuy passed away in 2017, the same year that witnessed the departure of one of the greatest Indologists to ever work in Argentina, Fernando Tola. Truly a sad year for Indian studies in Latin America. If to this we add that Professor Argüello, the leading Costa Rican scholar on Tagore, retired just 1 year later, on 2018, I can only say that as the new professor teaching the course on Tagore, I felt the weight of the world in my shoulders. Luckily, to paraphrase both Bernard de Chartres and Isaac Newton, I was also standing on the shoulders of giants. Beside a scholarly paper on Tagore from 1969, Chenapuy also wrote several general interest articles for the journal La Nación from Costa Rica, not to be confused with La Nación from Argentina, which I quoted earlier. Some of them were republished in the only book that Chenapuy ever published, from 2018 in Spanish, of Life, Love, Friendship, A Bridge Between Cultures. This is the image of the book. If you want to learn a lot about the impact that Indian studies have had in Costa Rica, mostly throughout the 20th century, this is the book to read. So one of the articles dates back to March 23rd, 1986, and it is titled Shantiniketan. In it, after quoting Tagore's last message from a lecture given at 80 years old and dealing with fate in humankind despite the crisis of modern civilization, Chenapuy adds in Spanish, "The beautiful face of the old man who uttered those words has accompanied me throughout many years, like a distant and invisible teacher. His poems, included in a textbook that I read in elementary school, awakened my interest in a country that years later I came to visit, and whose study has enriched a great part of my life. Shantiniketan, the poet's abode of peace, received my pilgrim steps and the attentive look of one who found there a spiritual home." I want to emphasize Chenapuy's words, quote unquote, invisible teacher. I believe this sums up my view of Tagore as an absent presence in Costa Rica. Chenapuy's book ends with a farewell section, in which she quotes a letter to her students, previously published in 1993, and which reads in Spanish, "Like the sower, we scatter the seed with the hope that it sprouts, grows, and bears fruit. But unlike the farmer who patiently waits to gather the harvest, the teacher knows that the fruits of his action do not belong to him. In the same way that children must learn to fly with their own wings, the disciple will have to follow his own path. The teacher scatters the seeds, but he will not gather the fruits of his action. In a way, this is the duty with which we are all born, to act without attachment, without being concerned by the results. Only thus are we free. Only then does life attain plenitude, and our hands are filled by the miracle of giving. We go up the hill, look back, and know that the years that passed, that the life that went by, were valuable as far as we were able to give our best. If it was not so, it is late to rectify the past, but while there is still life, there is still the opportunity to give. Someday, when we reach the end of the road, we will joyfully say, our hands are not empty. The task has been fulfilled. The seeds have been sown, and the fruits are everyone's. We are at peace. End quote. Even though these words were not written by Tagore, they clearly evince a lifetime of living like, /with/through Tagore's works, ideas and ideals. The images of the seed that bears fruit, of the fruits that do not matter more than the actions that resulted in them, of the bird-like child, of the independent disciple, of a collective duty, of freedom, giving, life, joy, and peace, will resonate not only with every learned person who has read the Bhagavad Gita or Tagore's works, but also with every person, past and present, Western and Eastern, who, like Terence made one of its characters say once upon a distant time, I am a human being and nothing that is human is foreign to me. Just like Terence or Tagore, Chenapui was a true humanist. Not as eloquent as Chenapui, but perhaps just as fascinated by Tagore as she was, I will carry on with our conversation and spend what little time I have left to talk about section 5, and last, the UCR's Tagore. UCR stands for University of Costa Rica, which is where I started my academic journey, and where Tagore has been taught, thanks mostly to Professor Arguello, since 1980. That is, for 45 years now. Maybe we should start planning a 50-year anniversary together. Professor Arguello has authored the following articles and chapters dedicated to the story of Tagore at the UCR. From 2002, in Spanish, the woman, the pyre, in Tagore's short story Mahamaya, published by the journal Estudios in Costa Rica. Also from 2002, Rabindranath Tagore at the University of Costa Rica, published online by the journal Parvas in India. From 2004, in Spanish, Rabindranath Tagore and his ideals about education, published by the journal Discussant in Costa Rica. From 2011, the 2 chapters published in India about Tagore in Repertorio Americano that I mentioned earlier. From 2012, in Spanish, The Post Office, or the Freedom of Human Beings, published by the journal Cañena in Costa Rica. From 2014, the chapter Costa Rica, in the book Rabindranath Tagore 100 Years of Global Reception, published in India. And from 2017, in Spanish, the educational thinking of Rabindranath Tagore in 2 great Costa Rican educators, Omar Dengo and Joaquín García Monge, published by the journal Actualidades Investigativas en Educación, Costa Rica. From yours truly, you could add the aforementioned 2011 chapter in Hispanic Horizon on Tagore's paintings, as well as a 2013 article on the home and the world, published in Costa Rica. Hopefully there will be others soon. And lastly, I would like to share a bird's eye view of the program for the undergraduate course on Tagore that we teach at UCR. In its overview, the course is set to study the life and literary work of Rabindranath Tagore as the expression of the Bengali cultural renaissance and the Indian nationalism during the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century. And as part of its contents, one reads historical framework, Bengali literature in the 19th century, the Tagore family and their influence in the intellectual formation of Rabindranath, the young poet and his lyric works, his educational labor and the establishment of his school in Shantiniketan and his university, Visva-Bharati, his philosophical thought and his essays, his dramatic works, his novels, and his short stories, nationalism and universalism in Tagore, Tagore and his time, Asia and the West in his oeuvre. Maybe in the future we can think of an additional content like Costa Rican reception of Tagore in the framework of his Latin American reception, for instance. For as Tagore himself used to put it, education is always a work in progress, and the teacher is not the only one responsible for the shape that it takes. What a true teacher Tagore indeed was. As the Sanskrit verse goes, Guru Reva Gatir, Guru Meva Bhache, Guru Naeva Sahasmi Namo Gurave, Na Guro Paramam, Shishur Asmi Guror, Matir Astu Gurau, Mama Pahi Guru. Or should I say Guru Dev? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roberto. That was very interesting. Not just about Rabindranath's reception in Costa Rica, but also the way you were talking about the relationship between Costa Rica and Argentina and all these things. These are very important areas which need to be explored. Now, Professor Ganguly was supposed to be here to discuss this thing, but unfortunately he couldn't join us. Yumna, is Professor Ganguly with us?
No, unfortunately not. I think he's still experiencing some technical issues,
Yeah,
but I will let you know as soon as if he does.
yeah, which is very unfortunate because an hour ago we were having a test session where he could join and it was all working, but now it couldn't. So anyway, I would request Professor Gustavo Canzobre for his comments, and then we can move on to the question and answer session then.
Thank you. Thank you, Nilanjana. Thank you, Roberto. Good morning to all our audience in Latin America, and good afternoon or good evening even in India to our Indian colleagues that are here in this meeting. Well, very interesting everything that Roberto has introduced, not only after what he mentioned, but also about all the fields you have opened, Roberto. So you have left work for us after your presentation, because you have introduced some new interesting lines on the subject. And this remarks how important Gurudev's visit was for all Latin America, not only Argentina, that eventually, occasionally, was the only place where Gurudev stayed. In fact, it wasn't supposed to stay here, as many of you already know. He was supposed to go through Argentina up to Chile and there take a ship to Peru, because he had been invited for the centenary of Ayacucho battle. And from there, it was supposed also to visit Mexico, that all of you know he had a strong impact in Mexican culture. But as we usually say, a blessed flu that caught Gurudev while he was walking along Rio de Janeiro's port. In a brief down, he got out of the vessel that was taking him from Europe to Argentina. Make that when he arrived to Argentina, he was a bit ill, and the doctors suggested he should not keep on traveling. He should stay at least to recover, and then he stayed 2 months, and all that story is already known. It's very interesting, Roberto, that the first 3 things you mentioned that appear there in Repertorio Americano are so distinctively of the strong influence of Gurudev. The first one, his play, The Post Office, You know, Victoria Ocampo mentioned when she herself handled the post office when in one of the events, the many events she organized to celebrate Gurudev's life. She presented in the National Cervantes Theater, one of the main theaters here in Argentina. She presented the post office, and there she said, Gurudev is Amal because he shares all the dreams of this little boy that wonders, that wants to go throughout the world delivering letters of the Almighty, of the Lord. But what the boy couldn't make real in the play, Tagore did, because he went all around the world, almost 50 countries, as everybody knows, because, and there comes the second thing you mentioned, he wasn't just traveling because he was fond of travel. He was fond of travel, but he was traveling because of his educational dreams, because he was an idealist, and he would collect at each place where he would go, he would collect donations for Shantiniketan. And that's the second thing you mentioned that appeared in Repertorio Americano as Tagore as a teacher. I think we have Shamu Ganguly here, so it's important to receive Shamu. Good evening, Shamu. Welcome.
Hello, Gustavo. Hello, how are you? I'm so sorry. It has been so much of a confusion joining this second time. It was really a confusion. But finally, I've been able to do it with the help of Nilanjana and others. So what is happening? How much has already gone? I'm sorry to intervene. Please go ahead. Finish your intervention, and then if needed, I will butt in. Please continue.
Shall I finish, Nilanjana, and then we give Professor Ganguly his place?
Yes, I think so, because we have already had Roberto's lecture. Now Professor Gustavo Canzobre is commenting. So after Professor Canzobre's comment, we can go back to Professor Ganguly once again. So yes, please, Gustavo.
That's fine. That's fine. That's fine.
Okay. So I was mentioning these three items Roberto mentioned that were the three first appearances in Repertorio Americano that are not just random. They reflect main characters of Gurudev's work, because although he's being known as a poet, the importance of his presence, and his presence is not a past in Costa Rica, as Roberto is showing, is that Costa Rica took all the educational legacy that Gurudev had along his life. And so the second is his mention as Tagore as a teacher and these values of serenity and sincerity that you mentioned. And the third one, again, when the publication of The Elder Sister, not many people know about all the work that Gurudev did for women's rights. He was one of the leaders of the nowadays so-called feminism. So many plays in the short stories he wrote that were really revolutionary. From 1890 on, he's been writing and showing not only to the Indian society but to the world that women must be given their proper place. So really, when I was listening to you, and the founder of Repertorio Americano was very aware of Gurudev's legacy, and it wasn't just, oh, maybe there is some strange unknown force that shows these things. That's the first thing I wanted to stress. The second one is that strong link that you mentioned between how Argentina was served to spread along the Latin America in general, but specifically you mentioned how it make Tagore's legacy arrive to Costa Rica. And as you mentioned, that's a very important link to keep on researching in order to show that Tagore's stay in Argentina from November 1924 to January 1925 was not just for Argentinians, but for all the Spanish-speaking world, as Shamu Ganguly can also stress. And the third point, this long and so important quotation you did from Alfredo Palacios. He was not only a professor at the La Plata University, he's known as the first socialist member of a Congress all along Latin America. He was an idealist himself. He fought for the workers' labor's right here in Argentina, and that he managed to get laws first out of his own work, and then during the Peronist government, although he was against Peron because his disagreement with the fascism that may have appeared along his government. And the three things that Palacios mentions are so important to get Gurudev's character as a practical idealist. Victoria Ocampo used to say that she shared with Gandhi and with Tagore this category because she herself was a practical idealist. And his stressing of the human values that Tagore was giving to the world. Palacios belonged to all the Argentina intelligentsia that was so close to India, although many times unknown because it was some kind against the official Catholic ideas, but he belonged to many groups, as you mentioned, about this Sociedad Luz of Alberto López Machado that we will have to research about him. We're not aware about who he was, but Palacios, along with Lugones that you also mentioned, Capdevila and Guiraldes, of course, and Adelina del Carril and so on, many other people that were so involved with Indian culture, but since they got to know Tagore, that was a deep India that got place. And also Palacios mentioned the Tagore as the source of spiritual teaching, as you mentioned in your quotation, as a great counselor of human race. And we are so glad that Costa Rica and all the people that you mentioned, Hilda, and also Garcia Monge, and of course, Arguello, Sol Arguello Scriba, that have taken his legacy and keep it alive. And they are, in fact, inspiration, for us, because we are also working here in Argentina in order to try to get a Tagore chair at the university, and where we are inspired of the work you are doing, Roberto, as you said, taking charge of a great task, but also stepping on those giants that were there before you. And last, the work of Hilda Chenapuy, because although all the literary influence that in Latin America that Professor Ganguly can mention so deeply, she stressed on the educational legacy of Tagore. Tagore would say that he would be remembered for his songs in India, but in that place we want to correct Gurudev, and we want to remember him and make him alive, because that's what we are working for, to show that it's a living legacy. His educational ideas are still tools that we can use to face the challenges of modern civilization. although, as you mentioned, and that Ilda reflected on his last writing, Crisis of Civilization, a few months before he passed away, there he stated that so important statement, I will never commit the mortal sin of losing faith in human being. He was aware of the challenges. Remember 1941, it was the middle of the Second Worldwide War, but he stressed that behind those dark clouds, the sun was still shining. And we will keep on being inspired of this. As you mentioned, quoting Tagore, education is a working process, and we are in that process. And we are very proud and very glad that you have been able to stress all this importance of how Tagore's legacy is still present in Costa Rica. Now we want to revert the influence. You mentioned the influence from Argentina to Costa Rica and all the rest of Latin America. And now the reality is showing from Costa Rica. That reality can be spread on all the Latin American countries, because Latin American education lacks of many of the facts that Tagore has given proper tools and proper answers, since he remembers that we are first of all human beings, and we have to assume the challenge of developing our sacred personality in order to get a proper place in life. So thank you very much, Roberto, for all the lines you have developed, and we can keep working on this challenge that Tagore himself and all the Costa Ricans, Garcia Monge, Hilda Chenapuy, Sol Escriva Arguello, can have given to us, and we will try to keep them alive.
Thank you so much, Gustavo. Now I would request Professor Ganguly if he would like to add something very quickly. We are very sorry that you missed the lecture and we missed you. But if you have some quick comments,
Well,
and then Yumna could take over for the question and answer session.
well, how much time do I have?
5 to 7 minutes, maybe?
5 to 7 minutes is too small a time anyway for this
Yes, I
entire
know, but yeah.
and
But
for this
let's. But
huge
yeah.
topic. But let's see. I'm very sorry to have missed the lecture and even most of what. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
We can hear
Yes,
you.
yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Now you see, I have worked on this the reception of Tagore in the Latin American world, but that's a huge area. You know, one can find in my book, which I wrote with, edited with Indranil Chakravarti, on Redescubriendo a Tagore, rediscovering Tagore, where there is a lot of stuff about his influence or his reception in Latin America. We must, but I am, I was most, concentrating on this whole question of Tagore and Costa Rica, and not Latin America in general. Because in Latin America in general, if you consider, then it is a very, very big area. Just imagine the whole idea of spiritual modernity that is introduced in Latin America in the first part of the 20th century from Mexico and other parts is further strengthened by the spiritual modernization, which is in contrast to the industrial modernization that the countries which colonized the rest of the world, they introduced 3-4 centuries ago. So it was a totally different kind of modernization. But let me not go into that entire area and just say a few things about Costa Rica. I have visited Costa Rica twice, and I have talked to many people, including Hilda Chenapui, and of course, Sol Arguelles has been our friend. She has participated in India and in other conferences with us. She has also written a very interesting article on the reception of Tagore in Costa Rica. Now, I'm mainly, I would put emphasis on this whole idea of the journal Repertorio Americano, which was first introduced in 1919 and which contained a a great emphasis on Tagore. Now, this was done from the interview that Tagore gave in New York, and a person and an intellectual called Luis Sepulveda. I do not know whether in the first lecture itself this name was suggested. I'm sure it was, but he, introduced. He talked about the importance of Tagore, and this article of Luis Sepulveda, which was published from Tagore's presence in the United States, and it was published first and this is a very surprising thing, that more and more things about Tagore are being revealed now as we go on. For example, I'm just going to talk about this particular lecture, but let me first inform you that we have discussed so much of Tagore in other countries of Latin America, in 19-20 countries of Latin America, but it was a great discovery by just 3 years ago by a person who is an Indologist, who is an advocate. She is an Ecuadorian, and her name is Elena Maria Barrera Agrawal, and she discovered that the first translation of Gitanjali was actually done in Cuba by a Cuban, and this Cuban was called Blanche Zaccarie, and she did the first translation of Gitanjali. This was not known to the entire world till about 3 years ago. Imagine, so there are so many other facets of Tagore which are still unknown and which are being researched by some people, scholars interested in Tagore. But I was like, so imagine, like Blanche Zaccarie's article, which was published in 1913 in a Cuban journal. Now, here is Luis Sepulveda, who is, publishing an interview with Tagore that was taken in the United States. And there he talks about a personal contact with Tagore, an interview with Tagore, and his own discovery of, till now we have found that Tagore has not talked anything about Latin America. In fact, in my own studies on Victoria Ocampo and others, we found that Tagore was lacking in that knowledge, and he never talked about, anything about Latin America. In fact, he came across many important people. Victoria Ocampo introduced him to, but nobody took, he never took any interest in all these great Latin American writers, thinkers, including Borges, who of course did not like Tagore's poetry, but he in fact liked other things in Tagore, like his nationalism, etc., in which we need not enter here. But it's a very important contribution to understand how the whole concept of nationalism that Tagore developed in his first essays in the United States, how he discovers the presence of those incipient thoughts on nationalism to be applicable even today, and from where the idea of the nation state and its ability to control the creative and spiritual nature of the human mind, of the human being, to take advantage and do damage to others, is talked about by Borges about this nationalism. But that is a thing totally apart. Let me talk a little bit, 3 or 4 minutes, about his contribution in Costa Rica. In Costa Rica, this particular essay by Luis Sepulveda, which is published first in Cuba, in a journal called Social and Social. So this is reproduced in 1919 in Cuadernos Hispanoamericanos, which is the most important mouthpiece of literature and carries this great effort to modernize Latin America. Now, there he talks about his personal interview, and this was never known to us. In fact, Sol Orgullo discovered this in an essay, and she tells us how this dialogue or conversation with Tagore of Luis Sepulveda, uh, you know, tells him or clarifies how Tagore is, talking about the difference between the Asiatic world, the Indian context, and the Latin American context, or the Central American context, or the Costa Rican context, where he says that you people are still a very, very young country, whereas India is a very, very old civilization, and therefore there are so many things in India, which in fact produces things that it has experienced, produces in our minds a lot of melancholy, and this melancholy is absolutely necessary to understand the importance of creations, literary creations, cultural creations. And this has happened in India, whereas Latin America is still, uh, you know, uh, lacks that kind of melancholic and mysterious and magical thoughts into the past of the civilizations, its civilizations, and it can learn from India. And this is the kind of conversation that goes on between him. Now, we were never aware of this kind of conversation. Now, I will not go into this conversation further, but just to mention that the other important person whose interview or whose impressions about Tagore in the United States is spread in the Cuadernos Americanos, is Gabriela Mistral. Now, you will find that Gabriela Mistral, the great Chilean author, Nobel Prize winner, she was a great admirer of Tagore. However, she never was able to have any big conversation with Tagore in the United States. She only was able to, was given the opportunity. At that time, she had not received the Nobel Prize, but before all his writings, she was able to watch Tagore, talking to people, and the approach of the United States audience, hundreds of people approaching Tagore, and with what intention they were approaching Tagore in those interviews. And there she expresses again that kind of devastating feeling in herself, that this man who looks, in this gown, uh, such a saint, has so much of beard, and beard, has a tunica which propagates him as belonging to some other world, and but his eyes, his whole face are, they show so much of shine and so much of intelligence that immediately she, Gabriela Mistras, is able to capture the inner essence of Tagore. And there she shows her great, dislike for the way Tagore has to, extend his hands and ask for money in order to, of course, Tagore at that time was thinking of developing Shantiniketan as an institution, and he required a lot of money. And this is what she, it really set her, very sad, in a very, very sad kind of sentiments that Tagore had to, this man of great literature, this man who combined, the mysticism with modernity, with spirituality, and who could uh, go into all the areas of art, from painting to poems. Imagine a person like Tagore. He's writing more than 2,500 songs himself, and the greatest surprise is that he puts rhythm to all the songs himself, and that continues till today. Out of those 2,500 songs, there are about 500. I mean, this is available in books like Ketaki Kushari Dyson's book, Shankar Ghosh's book. This information is available, that, she that he put tune, the rhythm to all the songs himself. Nobody else participated. Now this kind of, and then his, of course, ability to, to paint, which started from an experience in Victoria Ocampo's own house, from the doodles. Now this, and then of course theater, then of course dance, drama, and other facets. Now one of my one of my books, which I wrote with the great comparatist in India, Shishir Kumar Das. I mean, he once told me, Shamu, I was asking him, how much has Tagore written? And he told me, just guess how much could he have written. So I said, about 5,000, 6,000 pages. He said he wrote more than 18,000 pages by hand himself. And if a person like you, average person like you, like me, were to copy those, I would take more than 57 years doing, that copying business for 8 hours a day. I would take 57 years. So this kind of a genius is absolutely impossible to find, not to talk of his other areas of entry into philosophy, into mysticism, into areas of, the combination of the I and the you, the presence of the you in the I, this kind of a human approach and its explanation, to convert the nature of humanity, now that has never been found. And in spite of the fact, now all this is happening when Tagore himself has written his translations, and those translations were the basis of reading in Europe. And but it is when they were translated from, and I don't want to go into that area, when they were translated into Spanish, in by Juan Ramon Jimenez and Zenobia Camprubí in Spain, and plus so many others in the American, Latin American framework. I don't want to go into naming each one of them. Just imagine, it is the Hispanic world where he lives, in spite of, the fact that his own translations into English were not found to be very, very elegant. they were not found to be very literary. They were slowly and gradually after the 20s, after the 30s, he lost his importance in most of the Europe, and picked up later in other places. But it is only in the Hispanic world that his entire glory continues because of the great translations into Spanish, whether in Spain or in Latin America. So in Latin America, one of the most important journals is Cuadernos Hispanoamericanos, and that goes from 1909 with Garcia Monge and Brenner, and these are the people who continuously, put emphasis on Tagore's most important works, particularly in the field of education and in the field of theater. And we will be very surprised to know that those plays that he wrote, how that created an atmosphere, and this was written about in 1920 in Cuadernos Hispanoamericanos, in order to spread this knowledge into the entire Latin America. So Cuadernos Hispanoamericanos, which has a life from 1919 to 1958, within this period is the most important journal for the spread of Tagorean ethos in Latin America. But it also contains those aspects by very well-known people like Gabriela Mistral, who point out the great anguish Tagore has to undergo in order to create schools like that of Shantiniketan, to collect money in order to expand the activity of Shantiniketan. And this is where the whole idea of the tussle that this person, which we cannot even imagine the kind of suffering that he had to undergo in his own life. Physical suffering, yes, but also he lost, five of his most close relatives. His wife, his son, his daughter. You know, they just passed away within a period of 7 years in beginning of 20th century. But in each of these deaths, Tagore finds a kind of a space for understanding the relationship between life and death, and where which is what the Cuadernos Hispanoamericanos also tries to understand. What is this kind of spirituality in this man, that they're able to that he's able to go into such facets of life that science cannot explain. No science can explain this. In fact, with his conversation with Einstein also, this particular fact comes up. What is the difference between science and religion? Uh, a topic where, of course, I cannot go in. So I do not want to go any further. I've been given only 5-7 minutes, so that should, I think, sum up some of the aspects that are so important in where Costa Rica itself has. And imagine, in Latin American countries, if there is any one country, a small country, which has shown a different path to the rest of the Latin Americans, it doesn't have an army. It never kept an army. And its police force behaves in a very different manner. Its whole approach to education in various places. In the University of Costa Rica, I myself watched how Tagore's thoughts were taught by two different people. At that time, Sol Orgullo was teaching, and I think our participant, he also was a student, and our main speaker today, he was also, if I am not mistaken, I'm a little confused about his image, but probably he also came to our university, Jawaharlal Nehru University, to give a lecture last year. And I think I was present in that lecture also, where
Sorry, Professor Ganguly, I'm so sorry to interrupt. It's just been fascinating to listen in. I just know that our Zoom call is going to be cut off in
oh
about
yes, yes, yes. Oh
eight
yes.
minutes.
I'm
No, no,
sorry.
no, no,
I'm
no,
sorry.
please.
I'm sorry. That's all. That's all. I
No,
don't
no,
want to proceed any further. I'm very sorry to have created this kind of a confusion. It's not my fault. It's the fault of technology, which a person
oh,
like me cannot
please,
cannot hold.
no worries whatsoever. We all know in this day and age, technology always fails us. It always does. And it's no worries at all. I think we got so much from the presentations from all three of you. And I know that we just have a few minutes, and there is a
For
question in the
questions,
webinar chat. So if
please.
everybody could stay on, I'll read that question. Did Tagore's philosophy of education have any impact on the educational system of Costa Rica? And if any of you would like to take that, thank you.
Well,
Probably I should say
I
something about. Oh,
please.
Professor,
Hello, hello, hello.
it's great
How are
seeing
you?
you. All good. Thank you. It was great listening to you and that you were finally able to join us.
Oh, this is my good luck.
So this is one of the main arguments for this long-lasting presence of Tagore in Costa Rica. It has been like two-faceted. If this was at all clear during my presentation, during the first period, the emphasis is more on a writer. So we have this poet who writes many literary genres, not only poetry, but also drama, short stories, novels. And we had also great Spanish translations, as Professor Ganguly mentioned earlier. And all of this was republished. I want to emphasize this sense. Repertorio Americano was a general interest journal, and most of what was content there was being republished from other Latin American sources, mainly Mexico, and a couple of years later, mostly from Argentina. And the people who made these decisions, uh, it would be a little bit difficult to go to speak about it with some level of detail, given that we have little time. But in general terms, we can say that late 19th century and early 20th century Costa Rica is fascinated by non-Western things. There is a growth in the intellectual milieu of people studying in South America, going to Europe, and finding other cultures, other literatures, other authors there. We have the beginnings of the Theosophical Society. We have the Frankmasonry starting as well. Some people looking into Buddhism. There was a lot of interest in what was happening with Gandhi in India. That was followed really closely in Costa Rican sources from the early 20th century. So with all of this happening, we have these key figures in our cultural history that were responsible for starting again an educational process that was put on hold for a couple of decades. Costa Rica used to have a university called Santo Tomas by the late 19th century. This university closed. And during the beginning, the first half of the 20th century, the intellectuals were worried that we couldn't be without a university. So some of these minds worked together, and eventually by the 1940s, which is a landmark of a decade in Costa Rican history in terms of uh, social security, public universities, and so forth. We have the University of Costa Rica beginning, and the people responsible for this, like Roberto Brenes Mesen. Brenes Mesen studied philology in Chile. He knew about Sanskrit since he was very young. He studied in New York at Columbia University, where Sanskrit primer was republished, he bought it and brought it back to Costa Rica, and we used that for like 50, 60 years to learn Sanskrit here. For instance, I have researched this subject. If all goes well, this should be published in a journal by India International Center. Maybe it will come out this year, hopefully. But there's this whole like apparatus of people working together and trying to recreate or redefine what education is, especially higher education, because higher education is thought of as the way to permeate or to bring these ideas to the next generations. This university had a great emphasis on the faculty of education, for instance. So other people that I have mentioned, like Emma Gamboa, Hilda Chenapuy herself, the greatest Costa Rican Indologist, she taught at the faculty of education. She was very influenced by Tagore, Indian art, Indian philosophy. She even taught Sanskrit for several years, and she was one of the people responsible for how the Faculty of Education would eventually end up taking its form. And if you want to read more about this, because I will not be able to like convey it all in this short time span, I would recommend you to read Professor Solarguello's paper that I believe I mentioned before, The Educational Thinking of Rabindranath Tagore in Two Great Costa Rican Educators, Omar Dengo and Joaquin Garcia Monge. This is a paper that pretty much sums up what I have said and brings some other examples.
Can I add one small thing in a minute?
Please do.
May I? Do I have the permission to do this?
Please do. Please do.
Please do. Please do.
Just give me 1 minute. No, I will just like to mention, apart from what our main speaker has said, let me just give two examples. For example, the writing of Tagore that was selected to be published in Cuadernos Hispanoamericanos as a very, very important piece for the education of children as well as adults, but mostly children, was the was a piece which everybody in Bengal knows. They're talking about the parrots. So the la educación del papagayo. Now this was published in one of the issues of this Repertorio Americano. This was published by Garcia Monge, and a lot of emphasis was placed on its actual value. The other important thing, out of the many more that I would like to place for your record, is that the other publication was El Maestro de Escuela, the teacher of the school, the master of the school. This is the edition which came out in 1925. 1925, Costa Ricans are talking about the role of the teacher of the school to educate children, in order to bring up children in that kind of a spirit which was already prevailing in Shantiniketan. So, just two examples I have given out of these so many others which can be added to the great work that this particular journal, no other journal in Latin America has done so much, given so much of emphasis to Tagore's views on education, particularly of children, in bringing up all these values, particularly the values of humanity, and universality. And universality, that's a very important word, in human beings. So both these people, Garcia Monge and Brenner, they understood the importance of, and there are others also which were already published in Mexico by Vasconcelos. He had spread, those four important books, Sadhana, Nationalism, etc. Four important books which were 25,000 copies were printed and distributed free in Mexico by Vasconcelos when he was the secretary of, in order to train, in order to bring out a different culture, which is very different from the deterministic capitalist culture in Latin America, and which would take Latin America, Mexico particularly, and Latin America into a direction which Vasconcelos himself thought would provide a new race, una raza cósmica, a cosmic race that would give us a different identity than the colonizers, particularly the Americans, wanted to impose. Now, these are some of the things that come out from the attempt of the Latin Americans. Particularly, we were concerned about the Costa Ricans here, in order to not only bring out what Tagore was at that time, but also see his importance for the future of Latin America. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ganguly. We do have one more question, so can the panelists just stay on just a few more minutes? Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay. What is your opinion on Tagore's plays like The Post Office, Red Oleanders, The King of the Dark Chambers, Sacrifice, etc.? So what is your opinion on these plays in light of the theater of the absurd? And that's in the chat if you need to read it. And if there's somebody who would like to take that.
Well, these particular plays were not discussed or brought in. They were translated, of course, but not discussed in the context of changing the culture or bringing new aspects of culture, just in order to show the different aspects of humanity. They were translated, but none of them had that kind of impact which the other books that we talked about had for the Latin American youth. This is my reading of, people may not agree, but this is my reading, because there were other very, very important translations that came out in Latin America, that were coming out in Latin America. In Argentina, for example, the 100 poems of Kabir that was brought out in 1917, 1918. Imagine the kind of impact it had on the creation of the whole idea of love, and the way love could completely change the history of hatred in that particular period of Argentina in the first part of the 20th century. So, and these were really very, very important in the context of the society in general in Latin America. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, it seems we do not have any other questions, so I would like to thank our panelists very much. Thank you so much for being here for us. I would like to thank our university authority, my colleagues at the Center for Comparative Literature, and of course our colleagues at Coherent Digital. With all their help, we have been able to organize this. Thank you so much to all those who were here with us listening to these conversations, for your questions and everything. And we do have another lecture planned in February. So we hope you would be able to join us again in February. We will share the details with you later. Thank you so much. Elizabeth, Yumna, would any of you like to come in here?
I just wanted to note that the session is recorded, so we'll be sure to share it out with everyone that registered. We had well over 100 registrants, which is really exciting. So thank you so much for doing that, and we'll be in touch with you with the recording and other resources.
Thank you.
Will the recording be available for us?
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
Definitely.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Yes. The recording will be uploaded to the archive of Coherent Digital as well as to the YouTube channel of the Center for Comparative Literature. So we will share the link with you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you
And thank you
all.
to our
Thank you very much.
panelists.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much
very
to our
much.
panelists.
Thank you,
you.
everyone. Take care.
Have a good evening. Bye-bye.